Hey guys, project-zodiac here, and this is part 4 of my X-Men film explanation series. Um, on this video, we're going to be finishing up the characters portion of the retcons and continuity errors and how they're not retcons and continuity errors, how they actually all make sense and are all important to the story. Um, and we're also going to talk and finish talking about the world aspect of these things. And then there will be one more video after this. So let's continue on with the characters. Before I start, I do have to really state a disclaimer that all of these videos will have spoilers for every single X-Men movie. Every single one of them, including Dark Phoenix. So Shadowcat. How is Kitty able to send people back in time when that's not her powers? Well, mutants' abilities evolve over time or they change, and we see this all the time in the X-Men comics. This is the case for Kitty. She was and still is able to phase through objects, molecules, and atoms, and so on. But that's not the limit of her powers in the film universe. At some point, she discovers that she can also phase a mind through time, and that's what allows her to be able to send people back in time. And that's basically just how she discovers her powers. It was just through time she just discovered a new element of her powers that she didn't know she could do before. Caliban. How is Caliban in Logan but also in Apocalypse? This one I've heard a few times, especially around when the movies were coming out, and soon after the movies came out as well. Well, Caliban is not that old in 1983. He's probably in his late 20s or early 30s, and he also wasn't killed by Apocalypse. Apocalypse just leaves, so Caliban's still alive, and since he survived, that means he would be in his late 60s or early 70s in the film Logan. So that explains why he's there as well. Yukio. So how is Yukio younger and part of the X-Men and with different powers in Deadpool 2 compared to the Wolverine? Well, this Yukio from Deadpool 2 is in the new timeline. She was probably born later and maybe even in the US. And maybe she even has different or similar abilities. So we do know that some characters were born at different times after 1973. So again, Yukio wasn't that old in 2013. She was probably in her 20s, so she was probably born after 1973 anyway. So her birth was just changed due to Wolverine going back in time. What happens to Yukio after the Wolverine? She just probably went back to Japan as she's now with Logan in the post-credit scene. Or she's just traveling somewhere as well, like on her own. Jean. If X-Men 3 is set in 2006, like most people are saying it is, why is Jean an 11 to 12-year-old kid in 1986 in the original timeline, but a teenager in 1983? Well, again, if you guys saw my first video in this series where I explained the timeline very quickly, I'm sorry, I'm really rushing through this. It's just a lot of notes and a lot of things. So the first 3 X-Men films are not dated, and they are only stated as being set in the near and distant future. Based on the actual timeline, X-Men 1 is basically set around 1994, X-Men 2 around 1995, and X-Men 3 around 1997 to 1998. Professor Magneto do visit Jean in the original timeline 20 years before the events of X-Men 3, but they don't visit her in 1986. They visit her sometime between 1977 and 1979. So again, all of that matches up with the timeline video that I showed you guys. So this also aligns with what Professor Xavier tells Wolverine in X-Men 1, where Jean was one of his first students, and around the same time he also goes and saves Scott. Because we can probably assume that after they meet her, maybe a couple months, like right away to about a year or two after Professor Xavier and Magneto meet Jean, she joins the school. So literally like almost right away to a year or two after. she probably joins the school. So again, all of this lines up pretty accurately with all this time frame. This also still makes her a teenager in 1983 in both timelines. So why is the Phoenix Force not the same in Apocalypse and in Dark Phoenix? Well, it's not that they're not the same. There's more to it. If you see the movies a little bit closely, both Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, you will get a little more of a glimpse about this. It's not really touched on, but you can see it's a big factor of her Phoenix Force powers. So she's linked to the Phoenix Force from birth. She's stronger, like with her abilities due to it in both timelines. The Phoenix Force that's in her naturally is only a small portion of it. The rest of the Force is that big cloud thing that we see in space in Dark Phoenix. And it's looking for her, it's making its way towards her so that they could be whole in a way. um, the alien lady, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. Um, she tells Jean this, so we can understand that half of that force is naturally born in Jean, and the other half that somehow she's connected to is in space and is trying to make its way towards her. Now, in the original timeline, she doesn't meet the entire cloud force, let's call it that. Um, because she never goes into space, and I guess it just doesn't reach Earth by the time she gets killed. Um, so she only has her portion of it in the original timeline. Um, and so in the new timeline, though, they do go to space and she does get in contact with it. So that's why she becomes the full Dark Phoenix. Instead of just having part of it. So what we see in X-Men Apocalypse, that's just her half of the manifestation of the Phoenix Force um, being shown, and what we see in Dark Phoenix is her full extent of her abilities with the cosmic Phoenix Force entity, with her energy as well, with her half of the Phoenix Force. So that's how it is in the film universe. Again, there's two parts of the Phoenix Force in the film universe, and when they join, they become the true Phoenix Force. So Jean dies in Dark Phoenix, but she's alive in 2023. Isn't this supposed to lead up to the future events of 2023? Well, the alien lady, again, sorry, I can't remember her name. She says that Jean can bring life back from ashes, which is why she's able to return to life in both timelines. Now, for the last characters, which is mostly just for a gag, really, it's Toad and Blob. How are they drastically different ages and appearance? Like for example, Blob in X-Men Origins is not the same Blob in X-Men Apocalypse, and Toad is not the same Toad as he is in Days of Future Past and X-Men 1. Like the age and the appearance and everything is all out of the place. Well, it's very similar to Emma and Angel, and to an extent, even Jubilee. They're not the same person. They're just really some mutants with the same powers. Jubilee's case is different because Jubilee from the 80s could be her mom or her older sister, but everybody else, yeah, just similar powers, similar abilities. And, only the marketing really ever called them Blob and Toad. I think Wolverine in Origins calls Blob once Blob, but he didn't even call him Blob. He says Bub, and Blob thought Wolverine said Blob. Um, so again, that technically wasn't even really Blob, even though the marketing did say it was. And we only see Blob in X-Men Apocalypse very, very quickly as he falls down. And Toad, same thing. Um, he is named in X-Men 1. Magneto does say Toad, so we do get a confirmation that that is Toad. But the Toad in X-Men Days of Future Past isn't really named outside of marketing as well, and like credits and stuff. But again, just similar powers, different person. So that's all for the characters. Let's move on to the world, retcons and continuity errors, and see how we can fix that. So now, welcome to the world portion or the universe portion of me explaining some retcons and continuity errors that people um, say the X-Men films have, which again, the X-Men films don't really have. If you watch all the movies, you will understand how everything lines up. So let's get started. In Logan, it's 2029, and it is said that no new mutants have been born in 25 years. Yet in 2023, when Wolverine wakes up in his from his conscience, when his conscience enters his body, again in the new timeline, we see that plenty of young mutants are at the school. And young, like, I don't know, 10, 15, between 10 and 15-year olds. Well, Logan is set in 2029. 25 years prior to that, it's 2004. Transcendent probably started to wipe out mutants around the year 2000 or so, and by 2004, no more mutants would be born, but a thing like that would take time to take full effect. So I'm sure there was a few mutants being born between 2004 and 2010, but very, very few, like drastically few. For example, if it was 100 mutants being born originally in that time frame, then now it's probably like one or two mutants being born in that time frame. So by the time that no more mutants would have been born, it wouldn't have been right away. It would have taken a longer period of time to happen. And I don't think Logan actually means exactly 25 years, since absolutely no mutants were born. Again, since absolutely no mutants were born. Like zero mutants. Again, I'm pretty sure one or two would have been born every like 5, 6 years or something like that. That is enough to say no new mutants being born, but again, it's not technically accurate. So I think he just says 25 years as a rounding number, which also fits with the time period that I've been talking about recently and that I mentioned in my timeline video. Also, in the new timeline, in the 80s, the professor does tell everyone that he wants to make his school open not just for mutants, but for regular humans as well. So, a lot of those kids that we see in 2023's new timeline could be human kids, not just mutant kids. So, we can assume that a lot of these people aren't just mutants, but it's like now a school for both the gifted youngsters and just regular people. So again, there's two factors to that, and that actually really works out with the timeline and the consistency of all of the film series as a whole. Now moving on to the second one, in the 2000s, Professor tells Wolverine that he's been walking around without a memory for 15 years. How is that the case if Origins is set in 1979 and we assume that X-Men 1 takes place in the early to mid 2000s? Again, if you guys have been watching all the previous other videos, I quickly state we were never given a date when X-Men 1 and 3 takes place. We do know it's in the near and distant future, and we do know that Origin takes place in 1979. So 1979 plus 15 years makes X-Men 1 take place in 1994. And again, if you saw my timeline video, more specifically at the end of summer of 1994, just simply due to how everyone is dressed, and it's still warm enough to be out at the beach, but at night it's starting to get a little bit colder where they're wearing a little bit warmer clothes sometimes. More specifically Rogue, and a couple of other people on that train. So now, why does the dimension almost always look different? Has anyone ever actually seen most of these movies? They even make a joke about it in the movies, where this school literally blows up almost every few years or gets broken into almost every few years. Again, we actually see this a lot in the movies. So we can assume very safely that there have been a ton of remodeling between each and every single film, just because there's always a big time jump between each and every single film. Now, are Legion and the Gifted even part of this film universe? No, it's already been confirmed many, many times by the showrunners and the directors of the films that Legion and the Gifted are not part of the X-Men film universe. They're their own separate X-Men universe. So what's up with all of those comics in Logan? The X-Men are not world famous in the original timeline, yet there's comics about them. So does that make Logan be its own timeline? Well, no. In the original timeline, they're not famous because they keep things secret. But in the new timeline, they are, and we even see this in Dark Phoenix and in Deadpool 2. In Dark Phoenix, Quicksilver even says, so we're doing space missions now, meaning that they're giving missions from somebody else other than the professor. In Deadpool 2, the news reporter says it seems the X-Men have arrived. Again, showing that they are publicly known in this new timeline. In the comics that Wolverine has, we also see them wearing, the black and yellow suits. This is also very consistent with the suits and uniforms that they do use in X-Men Dark Phoenix and in Deadpool 2. Also, in those comics, trust me, I made sure to double check everything. Um, as I was looking through the comic portions of scenes of the movies, the characters that are confirmed to be present in those comics, so again, that we know are alive, um, are Logan, Professor Xavier, Storm, Scott, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Jean, Rogue, and Gambit. Meaning, again, it all lines up with the future events of um, 2023 from Days of Future Past, the new timeline. But again, the interesting thing is we see Gambit. So that probably means that in this film universe, at one point, Gambit joins them. After maybe Wolverine goes, because he does remember everything from his past now. Maybe he goes back and looks for Gambit, and Gambit joins the X-Men as well. So I thought that was a pretty cool little thing, especially since they've been trying to get a Gambit movie made for a very long time, and I'm very sad we're not going to be getting it because I actually did like Gambit in Origins. I know lots of people are gonna hate me for saying that, but I actually did like Gambit in the movie. So why do the Sentinels look different from the 70s and the 90s and the early 2020s? Well, it's simple. They were all just upgrades from one another. So in Deadpool 2, Deadpool changed the timeline again. How does this even line up? This must mean that Logan and all of these other movies now have different timelines. No, that is not correct. The biggest change that Deadpool does is go back a few months ago to save Vanessa. But he still remembers everything, and it's only been a few months, so he probably still went through everything the exact same way. He still went through, the X Force. He still went through Cable, the prison, all of that. Except that Vanessa is alive. She's not dead. He just decided to redo everything that he did, just keeping her alive because at the end of the movie, he is grateful for having this family. We do see this, but he still wants to save his wife, so or girlfriend. But yeah, he does want to save Vanessa, but still keep his family. So he just saves her, and to make sure that everything stays in place, he goes back and just redoes everything again, but this time with her alive. He also does save Peter from X Force. I don't think that's gonna have any serious effects though. Um, we also do see him kill Deadpool from X Men Origins. Um, but that's more of him breaking the fourth wall because that Deadpool again would be his father, and it would also and it's also set in 1979, which that 1979 got erased. So he can't actually time travel to a timeline that doesn't exist anymore. So it he again that doesn't really create a new timeline or anything. That's just Deadpool being Deadpool breaking the fourth wall. And it's literally the exact same thing with him just going to kill Ryan Reynolds because he is Ryan Reynolds. It's just him breaking the fourth wall on that point. with those last two ones. So what about Cable going back in time now to stop Russell and changing the future? Doesn't that create a new thing? Yes and no. It creates a new future far ahead, but it doesn't alter the past too much. It's sort of similar to Vanessa being born now. Sorry, it's sort of similar to Vanessa still being alive now. She's still alive, but just about everything else still gonna happen that's supposed to happen. The only difference is Russell's not gonna be killing people, and Vanessa is alive. So, and like what B said, whatever will happen will still happen in a way. So it doesn't really change the future too much. There's still gonna be somebody there. It's just not Russell, and whoever this person is just does not kill Cable's family. Again, Cable really only went back in time, yes, to stop Russell because he is a murderer in the future, but it's mostly as a revenge thing for killing his family. So his family is alive, and that's all that matters to Cable. Um, so that's why it still continues that straight path of still being set right after Logan, and it's not creating a new timeline. Because again, the present and the past wasn't really changed. It's mostly the future that has a slight difference in it. Again, slight difference, because the corporate of everything was Alkali Transigen, and they're still around and they're still operating. Um, well, not after Logan kills them, but again, so whatever Cable does actually change, it only takes hold after the events of Logan. And the final one for the road retcons and continuity errors and inconsistency is, why does nobody look different? Why does no one look older, younger? Why does everyone look the exact same way that they do 10, 20, 30 years ago? They probably do in their world, but in ours it's just because of Hollywood. But I'm sure that in the X-Men film universe, they, you know, um, Michael Fassbender's Magneto looks exactly as Ian McKellen's Magneto. So in their world, I'm sure that they do. And like the real world is just because it's Hollywood and they want to use these actors. So um, thank you guys for watching that so much, and I hope you guys enjoyed the last video, which will be a little bit shorter video, and it's how to properly watch all of the X-Men films in the correct orders. There's like 4 or 5 different orders, whatever you prefer. So I really hope you guys enjoy that. And I'm sorry that this video was really long and this whole series has been really long, but I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.